think that sort of notion of trying to get brilliant performance from a group of people quite quickly, building a bond around a vision of the future and what's possible, and then seeing if you can perform better than the sum of the parts. That's something I really took from sport. The highest level, the two big things that excite me are the fundamental kind of drivers. The first is half the planet's online and half is still to come. And you can really see how you change lives when people get connected to the internet. I've never seen a time when technology could help more people.
I thought a really interesting way to start today would just be talking about building things. And obviously, you've been a large part of building Google in Europe over the last 14 years. And I thought perhaps you could just talk a little bit about the journey of building Google and what it's been like, some of the highlights and lowlights over the last 14 years to find ourselves where we are today.
Well, thank you. And can I commend you also in your immense sense of style? It's good to see a well-dressed dress code here. But look, I've had a tremendous amount of fun at Google, and we'll talk a bit about careers, I should imagine. But one of the things I've most enjoyed is trying to kind of make connections and build things, as you said. And when I joined Google in 2007, it was still relatively early in the company's history. It just IPO'd a little bit earlier than that. But the internet and online marketing and the tools which we all take for granted today were still at a pretty early stage. And so, my job was really to kind of think about where we were going and what kind of capabilities we'd need as a company to be able to do what we needed to do. And I was sort of, as you said, I joined as a country manager for the UK, which is the biggest country for Google outside the US in terms of the size of business. It's a very vibrant e-commerce and advertising market. And so my task really when I joined was like to figure out how to run a country for Google. And it seemed like I did a reasonable job on that. And then I was asked to kind of look after more countries. And obviously the world's changed hugely in that period. We've gone from, the internet was a minority sport to we've now passed the 50-50 moment. Over half of the people on the planet are online for the first time. You just look at how digital tools have been an absolute lifeline to people in lockdown, how powerful they can be in helping economic recovery, helping people to kind of gain education and skills, particularly in emerging markets. Great, you're in South Africa at the moment. What the internet can do for Africans is going to be enormous. So I think we're at a moment of further inflection now, accelerated by the pandemic, the tech acceleration. My 80-something parents are using technology in ways they've never done before. Businesses are running remotely in ways they've never done before. And so I think we'll see more coming out of this. And at the same time, we've also got this inflection of machine learning and AI and what that means in terms of smarter tools that we can all use to be more productive and greener. So it's a very exciting time now, and I'm probably almost more enthusiastic about the power of technology to help people today than I was 14 years ago when I started at Google.
Awesome, that's fantastic. I can only imagine being part of the early joiners within Google. How fascinating the business must have been to watch grow. And I've always thought that one of the things which Google has so firmly in its advantage is the culture within the business. And having worked at McKinsey and having been part of great organizations throughout your career, I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about your experience with the Google culture and how it's helped you to build the business which you have in Europe, and also how the entire of Google has grown partly as a result of a great culture which has been created in the business.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the more I've worked, the more it's become clear to me that culture is everything. A favorite saying of mine is that behavior eats strategy for breakfast. Basically, you can have all of the KPIs and charts and flows and processes you want and manuals, but actually it's the way things get done around here, the sort of values that we hold in common, the behaviors that we reinforce, particularly as leaders, that really makes a difference. And I think one of the brilliance, things at the heart of Google's foundation were the founders. So they started the company at a time when sort of the dot-com bust was happening. And what they'd seen was friends of theirs starting companies and hiring their friends. And they went, we're not going to do that. We're going to hire like the best engineers we can find. So they, famously put out mathematical puzzles for people to solve online. And when people solved them, they went, oh, do you fancy coming and talking about a job at Google? And they kept a very high bar for the way in which they thought about hiring, not just for sort of engineering capability, but in terms of the sorts of behaviors they were looking for: collaborative problem solvers, people who were self-motivated but not looking for sort of the glory individually. They really believed that innovation was something that came from the collision of ideas. They set up the workplaces, which we're not enjoying today, but if you come to a Google office, you see somewhere that's fun and vibrant, but also where there are lots of places where you're sort of forced to sit quite closely with other people and connect and share ideas. So I think there's something very powerful there that persists through to today in terms of small teams working on big problems with those kinds of behaviors that really help. And I think I also reflect, I've been lucky enough to work in sort of elite sport, well, not work, I wasn't paid, but to be part of an elite sport organization. I worked in consulting at McKinsey, we can talk about that as well. And then at Google, three organizations effectively that have very strong culture at their heart in different ways. And, no culture is perfect, right? Google, it's very clear that we've got a lot of work to do on representation. If you want products to work for everyone and only a third of your engineers are female, that's not very helpful. It's very West Coast oriented, and actually we need to sort of diversify the kind of cultures that we kind of represent as well. So there's a lot to do on culture, but having some good fundamentals, I think, is something that's really helpful. And then finally, if you're trying to move fast, actually, culture guides what people do. You don't want to be top down, because what happens is you get very slowed down if you're waiting to have somebody above make all the decisions. And so people need to have a shared sense of where the company is trying to go, what sort of behaviors help you to be successful in the company, thinking about users first, trying to create things that create real value, the values at the heart of the open web. These are all things that are really important to us and help us, I think, to try to stay innovative at the scale we've now reached, which is also quite challenging.
Absolutely. It's interesting hearing you talk about Sergey and Larry and working with them in the early days, and how the culture stems from those two people and what they wanted to build. And it absolutely is such a unique culture which you defined there. I'd be interested whether, if you think about Larry and Sergey and working with them, if there are any sort of things which spring to mind in terms of really great attributes which they had, which allowed them to build these great companies.
Well, I think first thing I'd say is I didn't work that closely with them, because they are engineers at their heart, and I'm not an engineer. And I think, they rather reluctantly hired people who are not engineers to do some of the stuff that you need to do in a company, like, kind of hire people, build, scale, do sales, have customer relationships, think about marketing and regulatory policy, all that sort of stuff. But what I found was, as I said, they had a very singular kind of vision for the kind of company they were trying to build. And I think that rather unique sort of engineering mindset of, they could see far in advance of any of the rest of us, the potential of technology to be helpful to literally everyone on the planet. They talked about everyone being connected to the web at a time when, smartphones weren't a thing, and having a personal computing device in their pocket. They talked about the potential to have computers translate multiple languages. And today we have, Google Translate that works almost instantaneously and increasingly accurately, and 150 billion words a day are translated. So I think they had that kind of clarity of vision as, how technology and computer science specifically could help billions of people. And they also had this very clear sort of sense that good people working in tight teams to try to solve big problems was the way they wanted to build a company. And that's really still at the heart of what we try to do. Today it's much harder when you're much bigger, more prominent, and you also got more facets to the organization, so you can't coordinate everybody across everything that you're doing. But I think that's really one of the things that they set up very well, is sort of the quality of thinking, the big problems, the small teams, and trying to build against that vision. That makes
so much sense. I guess as I listen to you, I think, in the pillars of building a great company, you've got great culture, you've got these great small teams. I'd be fascinated to hear your view on the importance of great leaders in an organization. And this can once again tap into your sort of sporting experience, as well as how that sort of like transfers into Google and McKinsey. But firstly, just the power of great leaders, and then how you manage to pull great leaders towards you and get them to rally around you towards a common vision.
Yeah, I think I sort of reflect on this more and more as I try to build teams and scale things. One of the things we think about a lot at Google and many other companies do as well is, how do you scale how do you scale things? So I've been responsible for sort of setting up operations and building strong leadership teams in many countries. And, you know, in each case, what you're trying to do is reflect the culture. You know, if you're running Google in Spain, I want you to feel like a Spanish version of Google. And I also want you to be able to help Google understand, like, how do we need to show up better in Spain? So I think there's an array of different sort of leadership approaches. One thing I think I took from sport was, you know, my sport, which is rowing, is a sport where you compete really hard individually to get into a boat, and then you're in a boat with the people you've been competing with, and suddenly you've got to come together and compete as a unit against other boats from around the world. And I think that sort of notion of trying to get brilliant performance from a group of people quite quickly, you know, building a bond around a vision of the future and what's possible, and then seeing if you can perform better than the sum of the parts, that's something I really took from sport. You know, knowing yourself, knowing your limitations, being open about them, constantly looking at making small improvements to make the collective go faster. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, I've really tried to develop myself. But then I also think, you know, one of the key things in business at the moment is really trying to benefit much more from a diverse set of skills and backgrounds in companies. And we all know the research that proves that kind of more diverse organizations perform better. It's kind of sort of obvious in a way, and it's obviously the right thing to do for society. And I think, again, one of the things that the founders at Google did really well was try to bring in people who weren't necessarily just their friends. Obviously, they started off building, you know, a bench of computer scientists, but, you know, one of the top leaders at Google today is Susan Wojcicki, who was one of the very first employees, and, you know, very, very different sort of personality from the founders, and runs YouTube globally. And so just brings a completely different way of thinking about things. Or Urs Holzer, who is Swiss, employee number 8, he runs all of our data centers and cloud operations. And again, you know, really different kind of personality there. So they, from the early days, I think they were picking people who came from sort of different backgrounds and cultures. You know, technology is not the most diverse industry, as I mentioned earlier, but I think that sort of sense of, I had a mantra, which is, you know, a good idea can come from everywhere, anywhere. And, you know, they have this mission, which is to build something that can work for everyone, organize the world's information and make it accessible and useful for everyone. And that sort of thinking pervades culture and leadership in the company.
That makes so much sense. And hearing you talk about Susan Wojcicki, I remember her saying that you don't build a company, you build people, and then they build the company. And kind of interesting segue into how you get so many great people to join one organization. And I remember when I joined Google, and maybe this is a testament to the culture, when I heard I had the job offer, I didn't even know the salary before I'd said yes. I was like, I'm in. I'm like, if Google thinks I've cracked it, then I'm in. And I guess the challenge as you scale, and you know, when you get to hundreds of thousands of people working in a company, is how you continue to bring in the greatest talent in the world. And I guess the bigger you become, that challenge becomes bigger as you scale. So interested to hear your views on sort of hiring great people as the business grows.
Yeah, I think you're right. The bigger you become, the harder it is to keep that, you know, innovative entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, you know, it does help, by the way, if you're, you know, a company that's got a strong business model that's, you know, going gangbusters. Right. And so I do think, you know, it's easy to sort of look at companies like Google and go, well, you know, well, they should just replicate their culture. But actually, the fundamentals were incredibly strong, and not every company has those dynamics. So I recognize that, you know, lots of the things I've learned here might not be applicable sort of elsewhere. But I think, you know, when you're trying to scale up, you're trying to find people who can adapt more, you know, who can, you know, as you mentioned with the quote from Susan, you know, finding good people is everything. In a leadership position, the biggest impact I can have on the business and its success is putting somebody good in place and helping them succeed. That's it. And so, you know, I'm really clear on that. It's something I've really sort of felt increasingly in the last 5 or 6 years of my career. You know, I run operations across a lot of different countries. Me showing up and teaching, you know, the South African country manager how to run a country at Google is neither scalable, nor frankly, am I probably good enough to do it. And at some point in your career, as you sort of move into leadership positions, you get to the point where you start managing people who are better at the stuff that they're doing than you are. And increasingly, you start managing people who do stuff that you've got no idea how to do. And that's one of the kind of challenges of being a sort of general manager, which is what I am, is how do you kind of get the best out of those kinds of disparate groups of people, and how do you balance being across the detail enough to be able to be credible, but also, I suppose, humble enough to recognize that actually you know a better answer than I do, and that's part of creating that leadership environment, I think.
It feels so neat putting someone in the right place and then helping them to do their job really well. It feels like a really great articulation of leadership of a big organization. I was thinking, changing tack slightly and talking about Google as an organization and all the different things which Google does. I was fortunate enough to find one of Willy Wonka's golden tickets and ended up in the Google X team for a little bit, which was super interesting, and I felt like I learned a lot. It was fascinating in that time to see all the exciting things happening in the organization. And then I guess if we look at the core business, it's just remarkable how many people engage with Google and with YouTube in your average day. And I guess the question I'd love to hear your view on is what's happening within Google today gets you most excited? What is the most interesting component?
We should talk a bit about sort of Google X for a second. So people might not know this. At some point, we were doing kind of research type projects where the coordination of what those teams were doing with the rest of Google became rather heavy. And, if you were trying to pilot something and you need somebody from marketing to help you to do some research and they're too busy because they're doing some marketing on YouTube, that's not very helpful. So Google X was set up as a sort of part of the organization where we could do sort of research and experimentation into whole new fields that were crazy ideas, and not all of them by any means were going to come off. And so, what you had there was an experience of trying to kind of create an innovation factory in a number of arenas. And, that led to the creation of things like Waymo, which is, autonomous vehicles. And when we started that, it seemed like a fantasy idea that you could build a car that could drive itself safely. And, now, of course, we kind of all pretty much accept that that's possible. But it was actually driving for hundreds of thousands of miles with our Waymo team, which was part of Google X at the time, that proved that computers could drive cars more safely than humans. And it's kind of obvious because they can have many more sensors, they can make decisions in a split second, they can be trained over vast amounts of time, well beyond the lifetime of an individual human driver. So it kind of makes sense, but setting out to do those kind of breakthrough things really important. And as I mentioned, I kind of, at the highest level, the two big things that excite me are the fundamental kind of drivers. The first is half the planet's online and half is still to come. And you can really see how you change lives when people get connected to the internet. I'm an enormous fan of, Tim Berners-Lee and the Web Foundation that he's created to try to sort of preserve the benefits of the internet for everyone, making it affordable, making it respectful of privacy, making it something where you can bring out the best in humanity. And I really believe that, that's something which during our lifetimes, everyone being connected and getting those benefits will be an enormous plus for the world. In education, in ideas, in creativity and self-expression. Of course, it brings challenges. Like any technology can be used for good and for bad, and we need to make sure that we address those challenges and we have rules of the road that work and keep us safe online as well. So I think the first thing that really excites me is this potential of helping the other half of the planet get access to this stuff and doing it in a way where they get at least the same benefits that we've all enjoyed and hopefully more as innovation continues. I think the second thing for me is the sort of shift to cloud and machine learning technologies underpinning what we do, which means that now anyone with a smartphone has access to the world's best computing power. I mean, that's just revolutionary. All the things we talked about with things like translation, image recognition, increasingly, I think, ways of managing supply chains to reduce waste and carbon. These kind of tools are going to be available to everyone, and that really is transformational. I think the pandemic has accelerated some of that change, which means that it's challenging to deal with the amount of change that you need to go through if you're a big company, whether it's Google or a traditional retailer or travel company that are facing challenges at the moment. But those two things, accelerating innovation in computing thanks to machine learning and AI, and the cloud, which enables the computer to be not in your device but somewhere else, means that it's accessible and affordable in a way that's never been before. Put that together with everyone on the planet being able to connect, create, come together for innovation and education. I think that's a very, very exciting time. And I think, my final point would be, I've never seen a time when technology could help more people, partly because of the pandemic. We've seen this tech acceleration, but it's also become clear that, older people, people who hadn't been connected previously, huge benefits there. We've got a lot to do in education to make sure that education can work when it's partly remote. Or, telemedicine. People are now accessing doctors remotely in ways that sort of systems had tried to change for years but never did do. So I think there's a huge opportunity here for technology to do good. Policymakers, and we're engaged in some of these conversations, need to make sure that they set the rules of the road so that you balance, what society wants technology to achieve with what's possible, not all of which might be good. But that's part of what needs to happen next, the collaboration between governance and companies and communities to harness the potential of technology.
That makes so much sense, Matt. And you spoke a bit about the tech acceleration there and the sort of shift to more time in technology. And I guess as we find ourselves in 2021, there's been such a significant shift in the way the world works over the last year, and especially the corporate world. And I remember Marissa Mayer when she joined Yahoo, and there was sort of this challenge of, should we do more work from home or should we do less work from home? And I know that they actually shifted to less work from home in the journey there. And so in a sort of free market where everyone can choose what they wanted to do, it sort of felt like work from home not necessarily working as effectively. I guess as we look at the future, and work from home feels like a way bigger part of our lives. What's your personal experience? What do you think the future holds in that space? Do you feel like there's a net negative or net positive in the sort of relationship?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that, Google corporately doesn't have the answer. We've all got to figure out new ways of working. I think a few things, like firstly, everybody's realized that there's more you can do from home, and that working from home doesn't necessarily mean people are skiving. And I think that that's something that the boss class maybe had been reluctant to recognize previously or hadn't realized, but it's definitely the case that there are things that you can do remotely that are productive. By the way, we should preface all of this by saying like 60% of the jobs jobs that are out there, you have to show up somewhere physical, right? So this is, as you mentioned, just the sort of the corporate type, 40% of jobs depending on country. But so it's clear that you can do lots from home. It's clear that there are lots of benefits from having more flexibility. I think particularly, as we redesign the work of the future, we should be trying to design it to be more friendly for people who want to work in a range of different ways, part-time, flexibly over a year or flexibly over time. There's more ways to reimagine work. I think there's more ways to do work internationally across borders. One of the things I found is that, quite often in my normal job, I'm joining a meeting in California where I'm one of the small number of people outside the room. And that's actually quite challenging. But when everyone's remote, then it sort of levels things out, and it means some types of collaboration are easier. Another observation is that lots of the measurable things about productivity companies have found have gone up, or at least held flat. So, lines of code written per hour, in many cases gone up because people are uninterrupted, if they're lucky enough to have a space to work in. We'll come back to that. But actually the stuff you can't see and can't measure so easily is often the stuff that really drives growth for the future. So, you and I running into each other in a cafe and talking about what we're each working on and realizing that there's something that could come out of the combination, that's not happening. People kind of solving problems around a whiteboard, that's not happening. So there's a level of collaborative problem solving that's really hard to do with the technology here. There's something about culture. We mentioned this, I had a meeting in December with hundreds of people who've joined the company during lockdown and had never worked from our premises, and they're desperate to get in because although we're doing everything we can to be welcoming, actually, how things work around here is something you kind of learn by observation and turning to your next door neighbor on the next desk and asking, some obvious questions. It's harder to do. So I think collaboration and culture and coaching, these are all things that I think, we probably will find we need to do face to face, and we'll see how that goes.
Great. Listening to you talk there, it sort of made me think about this tech acceleration, and there's been such a shift over the last year, and I wonder whether this is going to create a more rapid evolution into the future. And I guess the question is, as we look over the next 5 to 10 years, what do you think the future of technology, marketing, advertising is, and the space which Google plays in?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's on my mind a lot is this point about everybody coming online for the first time. The web is open and affordable because of advertising. Advertising partly or fully funds pretty much anything you do online today. You might read journalism. And in most cases, that's at least partly funded by advertising online and elsewhere. Playing games, using technology like this. There are many, many things which are kind of wholly partly funded by advertising. And online advertising can be annoying. It can be useful. Google is successful largely because search advertising is not based on knowing anything about you. It's based on being useful because, you're in wherever you are, Cape Town, Johannesburg?
Yeah, Cape Town.
You're in Cape Town, very nice. You're in Cape Town looking for, a pair of cycling shoes. And we can show you ads from people who want to sell cycling shoes to people who are in Cape Town. And that's incredibly useful. And people don't want to block that kind of content. But when an ad for a washing machine follows you across the internet, because people have used sort of dubious processes in kind of how they've targeted those ads and haven't set frequency cap, that's incredibly annoying. And what that means is that people start doing things like installing ad blockers, which means that all advertising stops working, and that the legitimate things you want to fund through advertising become more expensive or can't get funded. And we see this at the moment. Obviously, newspaper publishers in particular are sort of saying they're struggling, particularly local journalism really struggling. Now, that's something that's been challenged and in decline for decades as other media have competed for attention and for advertising dollars, but it's been certainly accelerated by technology. So there's something for us to do, which is to make the case for advertising that works and is relevant and useful, but that is not sort of privacy intrusive. And actually right now we're in the process of rolling out a range of industry tools to try to do that, so that you can try to continue to have the benefits of an open and affordable web. So important for all the people I've been mentioning coming online for the first time, as well as protecting privacy and making sure things are not annoying and intrusive.
That makes so much sense, Matt. And I think what that creates and so much change just makes the role of marketers today, I think, so much more challenging than it was, let's say, 20 years ago. I think if you go back 20 years ago, the pace of change in television, for example, was not that significant. Year on year, you didn't have to learn that much new information. But I think there's never been a harder time for marketers as it is today, where you have to sort of kind of understand so many different areas, and digital, which was quite a clear thing to understand maybe in the early days, has become so complicated, whether it's ad exchanges or online video or different social platforms. What the benefits between each of those are. I just think that it's never been harder. And I was wondering from your view, what you feel the sort of like major challenges are for marketers today, and what you think, what you think the opportunities are for them.
Yeah, look, I think one of the first challenges is that when you see such an amazing array of choice and competition, which, by the way, despite the headlines, I'd argue that, advertising and marketing, there's never been more competition and innovation, right? You've got so many different options. So one of the challenges is that makes everything seem incredibly complicated. So I think the first thing for me is go back to the basics of what you're trying to do. Who am I trying to communicate with? What am I trying to communicate to them? What change in behavior or attitude am I trying to achieve? Just really start with the basics. Don't get confused by the complexity out there. And then you're absolutely right. You want to put the best tools to work for that sort of set of jobs. And I think, again, that's where there's an amazing ecosystem out there of people who've got specialist knowledge and skills. And I think not just in advertising and marketing, but more broadly. It used to be the case, in the 1950s or 60s, where companies did one simple thing. They're trying to kind of sell widgets to you. They're trying to make sure that they make a bit of a profit in doing it, and kind of that's it. Now the world's incredibly complicated. You've got to satisfy shareholders and stakeholders that have sustainability policies. You've got to kind of make sure your customers are delighted. You've got to have global consistency, but local relevance and customization. It's incredibly complicated to sort of run organizations. And I think, in almost every field, there's no one organization that can do everything perfectly. So actually to do these things, whether it's advertising and marketing or other types of day-to-day operations in business, you actually need to be really good at building partnerships and working with suppliers and so on. One of the things that I do, it's still in my job at Google, is work with some of our biggest customers and partners. And in almost every case, we are supplying them in some areas. We are competing with them in other areas. They are supplying us in other areas. And you just have to accept that that's the normality, and that probably needs a different skill set from business people, where you can do this balance. And that's one of the things I think I've got from sport, this balance between sort of competing, but also collaborating, and being able to do that in a respectful and positive way, I think is a key skill for business these days.
Absolutely. And touching on sport again, it's so interesting looking at your sort of like track record for high performance. It'd be interesting to understand for yourself how you feel you've managed to, at all stages, perform in such a high level way, and then also how you try and transfer those types of philosophies which drive high performance onto the teams around you.
Yeah, well, it's very flattering, isn't it? And I remember at business school looking at a couple of cases. There was the Honda case where they talked about how Honda brilliantly entered the US market and segmented it in such a way that these new scooters became an amazing thing. And then there was a version of the case that showed you that that was all entirely accidental, and they were really trying to be Harley Davidson and totally failed. And I think that it's easy to look at people at a point in their career and go, oh, he's got a job that I kind of think is quite cool. How did he get there? And I could tell you an amazing story of strategy and sort of continual success and hard driving motivation that got me there. But actually, your career is based on a whole bunch of accidents. There's periods of boredom, periods of doing stuff you're not good at. And so I went through lots of that too. I was, as you said, doing lots of high level sport at a time when there was no money, lottery or otherwise, to fund it. And as a result of that, after graduating from university, I went into real estate, which I was terrible at and really bored with. I used to kind of go training in the morning, go to the office, try and catch a sleep in the toilets for half an hour because I was so tired, try and get away with, doing as little as possible and then go training in the evening. And unsurprisingly, I wasn't very good at that. It's one of the reasons that took me to business school. And for me, business school was a chance to just try to understand business and create some better options. And then from there, I went into consulting, as I mentioned, learned a lot from being at McKinsey. There's a company with a strong culture. It's in the headlines at the moment for parts of that culture that might not have gone so right. But, really strong apprenticeship model, really strong on the toolkit that you need in problem solving in business. And I took a lot from that and was fortunate to find my way through that. And then I went in, having done strategy consulting for a number of years, I went into one of the most strategically challenged industries, which is newspapers. And actually tried to figure out how to help newspapers transform, and ran a lot of digital operations and so on, and then to Google. So I feel like, when you look at careers, there's a combination of collisions and happy accidents, like running into somebody who convinced me that maybe going to business school was something I could afford with a soft loan. Running into somebody from consulting days who worked at Google and said, hey, you should think about coming here. We need people like you. These things were coincidences, not to do with me being either strategically brilliant or, just the best person to hire. A lot of luck and randomness is involved in these things.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a modest way of framing it. But I guess one of the things which is super interesting in a role like your own is ensuring that you get a lot of stuff done every day. And I recently read Bruce Daisley's book, specifically about sort of making sure that you get lots done, but then also really enjoy the work which you're doing. I'm just interested if you have any sort of ways that you specifically have evolved to treat your day, whether it's sort of making some of your time available to not have meetings, or if you have any sort of specific ways that you get the most done every day.
Yeah, it's a great book. Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, I think is Bruce's
That's the one,
book.
yeah.
Bruce used to work at Google and then went on to work at Twitter and done a great sort of podcast series exploring the world of work. And why his book, I was like, oh my God, I wonder whether a lot of that was kind of working with me was horrible and it's a reaction to that. But I think lots of people have had to rethink their approach to how they do work during lockdown. It's probably made us all reflective. A few things I think, number one, I'm lucky enough to have a job where worst case, nobody dies, right? Not getting my work done well or making a mistake, right? Doesn't actually harm people. Obviously there are lots of things we need to do really well and we make sure we try to do them. But, first thing is just to recognize that you can leave things to one side and, not a lot of bad things will happen as a result of that. Which then liberates you to sort of really think about, well, what are the most important things that I should do so that, actually we do good things, and that we, protect the downside. And I think that then for me is about personal energy. And again, something that I really took from sport. I know quite well, what motivates me, whether I'm in a good mood, a bad mood, whether I've got energy or not. So I've long been a devotee of sleep. And if you're watching this and you've got young children, forget it for the moment. But otherwise, get lots of sleep is a good thing. And I've always subscribed to that. And now there's a great book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which sort of takes you through the science of that. So managing your personal energy through sleep, eat, exercise, absolutely vital for me. Figuring out, which part of the day I'm productive in what ways. So, I'm kind of better at thinking in the mornings than the evenings. One of the challenges of my job is that I have to do quite a few calls with my friends in California late in the evening. And that's my worst time of day. I'm grumpy. I've had enough. I can't think very straight. I'm not very articulate. So this is a problem for me. And so what I try to do is kind of get people to send me stuff that I can read and engage in, so that by the time I show up, I can just say, look, I've sent you this thing, rather than trying to be my best at that time of the day. So I think those kinds of things really help. And then, as we talked earlier, right, the best thing you can do is hire good people and have them help you to do this stuff, and particularly to do the stuff you're less good at. And part of careers for me is figuring out who you are and what you're good at, and try to do more of the things you're good at. Yes, you have to be good at the basics of lots of stuff. And I think that's one of the things I learned from consulting. Actually, there's some stuff there that I turned out to be really good at, and some stuff that I was pretty awful at. And on the pretty awful side, I had to learn how to do it. I had to learn how to do the detail, bottom up, hard yards analysis. And after a while, I sort of learned some joy in the pain. But that's not my kind of strong suit. You've got to be able to do it well enough. But actually, my strong suit was much more kind of looking at patterns and synthesis, and trying to make complicated things simpler, and trying to get people together to kind of get things done. And that's what I've tried to focus on doing more of, and making sure I've got people around me who are good enough at the other stuff, so that they can pick me up if I'm not sharp on it.
That makes so much sense, Matt. And I guess you touched on this a little bit there. I personally have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, so I know that I'm deep in the sleep struggle. But one thing I'd love to hear your view on, and I think we all go through ebbs and flows of this in our working life. But this idea of balance, and trying to make sure that you're there for your kids, but also that you manage to get exercise in, and you manage to see your friends, and you manage to get everything done in a very demanding job. How do you manage to juggle all these balls at the same time?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd say is I try to sort of think about over a sort of 2 to 3 month average, am I in good shape? Right. So you might have a week that's particularly tough, or you might have to work over a weekend or whatever. But on average, over a number of weeks, am I okay, is quite a good thing to ask. And that's something I really learned from consulting. I worked in a culture that was very hard driving, and I had come from sport, and I knew, in sport, the importance of rest, and you can spot when you're off 1% on something. And here are all these people I was looking at, and they were dog tired. They're supposed to be the smartest people in the world, and they were not investing in their own health or well-being at all. And I was, people would pick me up for going to the gym during the day. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm going to the gym. But haven't you got work to do? Well, yes, I have, but I'm going to be better at the work because I'm fit. Well, what are you doing going home at it's 11 o'clock at night and you've got another 2 hours work to do? I just thought it was crazy. And I think that's where you get bad outcomes. So, but partly I kind of had a bit of confidence that I knew how to perform. And also that, if that was the culture they wanted me to work like that, I wasn't going to be able to, I was going to break. So I think that there are some things there. It's harder when you're starting out because you don't have the sort of leverage. But once people start seeing how you work, I think there's much more awareness now of, trying to make sure that people focus on the outcomes rather than the, how they do their work, and also of sort of mental and physical health. I think if there's one sort of big benefit that's come from this period we've all been going through, is it's much more of an open conversation about how are you doing. And as when you ask somebody how are they, you actually are asking a proper question and you get a much more relevant answer. And I hope that continues.
Absolutely. Matt, thanks so much. So these are all the questions which we crowdsourced from the classes. And so we've now got some Q&A questions which have been sent through on the chat here, which I'm going to read to you. And the first one is just any tips on getting a job at Google?
Well, I'd be delighted if anybody's interested in a job. the worst thing you can do is try and contact me, because all I do is put you back into the system. As you can imagine, we have lots of openings. You can find jobs at Google by Googling them, and then there's a whole set of channels to apply through. I think, more broadly, what I'd say is, how do you arm yourself with the skills you need to be successful in a world where technology and digital sort of skills are more important? Whether it's Google or elsewhere. And I do think sort of being curious about the technology, playing with it is helpful. You don't have to be a coder, but you do have to, I think, be a bit more aware of how things are changing and fast. So I think that's a really important thing. And, at Google, we also look, as I said, for some of those kind of behavioral traits, as well as, depending what we're hiring for, there's some role-related expertise too. So have a look and you'll see what Google's looking for. But I think much more broadly, think about what is going to equip you for the changing world ahead of us: curiosity, creativity, collaborative skills, and some subject matter expertise.
Great, thanks, Matt. The next one here says Google and McKinsey might share some cultural aspects, for example, non-hierarchical approach to teamwork. But thinking about what's different, which cultural aspects do you miss most from McKinsey and in Google, and the other way around?
It's a great question. And like I said, I learned a lot at McKinsey. I personally didn't find it a very happy culture. I felt that it was rather more hierarchical, and I felt that the kind of attitude to sort of well-being and the results wasn't quite in line with my own kind of personal perspective. Now, it's obviously a very successful company, although it's going through some challenges at the moment. But I think, I learned a lot about apprenticeship, team working, coaching, writing skills, problem-solving skills, which I use every day. What I felt different about Google was it had those similar things, but it also had an encouragement to be yourself and to bring some joy and fun into the workplace, and to be more kind of caring about people. I suppose the other thing is it's not a client service organization, and so that has some different dynamics in the drivers. So for me, I feel more at home at Google. There are lots of great things in the McKinsey culture, as I said, particularly I think the sort of apprenticeship model of, you were evaluated. One of the things I really liked was you were evaluated partly on your sort of client impact, were you helping the clients deliver great work and project, and partly on your people impact, so developing the team around you. And I think that sort of notion of everyone being accountable for the people stuff, not some remote department, that is quite a good thing that I've tried to carry with me.
Very interesting. Thanks, Matt. The next one here, can Matt elaborate on the challenges of general management that he mentioned? How does he ensure that he has the right level of detail to engage meaningfully with his team members on more technical related discussions?
It's a great question, and it's probably one of the bigger challenges for me at Google. So I spend quite a lot of time interacting with our sort of senior product leaders, usually sort of saying, right, this is what we need to be different for this product to work for, people in Africa, or for, the German legal system, or whatever it happens to be. And so there is absolutely, and these are the, some of the best engineers in the world. So you kind of need to have your facts pretty straight. And so I've learned over time, how to do that. Partly the consulting skill set was helpful. I've got, reasonably strong analytical skills, but I'm not an engineer. And then partly also, I always try to bring some insights that they won't have. So I really try to spend a lot of time looking at, user behavior on our products, and also talking to people about, how they view what we're doing and so on. So I try to make sure that I bring, a robust point of view, analytically robust, but also some color that, they might not otherwise be able to get. And I think that in an organization like ours, where I'm kind of representing all these diverse cultures and countries and customers and users, that's one of the value adds that I can bring is, can see the pattern across, diverse countries, from sort of Nigeria through to Switzerland, through to Russia or Turkey. And so that's what I try to do.
That makes a lot of sense. Next question here. I'm curious to know the level of centralization of innovation at Google. Do regions drive their own innovation, or is it still all driven from the US HQ?
It's a great question. So what we have is global product organizations. We organize our engineers into kind of product areas, or YouTube or cloud or search or whatever. But those engineers are increasingly distributed around the world. And one of the things I've seen in my time at Google is, we've gone from having hardly any engineers in Europe to having thousands. And so what we try to do is, increase the representation in those teams. We're definitely trying to build products that work for billions of people. So it's no good building a product that's only good for the Icelandic market. But those products increasingly have to align with a variety of local laws and customs and different competition and everything else. So there's a level of balance there. And so, yeah, the way we try to work is by looking across those different places and innovating, always with the focus on the user first, and trying to sort of eliminate friction, do things that delight users, make our products relevant and useful. And the other thing which I really enjoy about being at Google is we're also trying to look at creating an ecosystem of value. So whether you think about, Android, Android's a free operating system for mobile phones that's made mobile phones more affordable for 80% of the people in the world who use mobile phones, right? That's an amazing thing. And we've sort of created value for handset manufacturers, for app developers, and obviously for users, and many others by doing that. So sort of trying to innovate, but in a way that creates opportunities for others on top is something that I think, we try to do in everything, all our product work.
Thanks, Matt. The next question here comes from Andre Redlinghuis. So, hi, Matt. I noticed a picture of Africa on your shelf, the A of EMEA. I'd love to know how you think technology will help to solve some of the big challenges in Africa and everywhere else in the developing world.
Yeah, well, I sort of mentioned this. I'm really passionate about this personally. I think, when I took on responsibility for what we're doing in Africa, the first thing I did was went and spent time with people, not our teams, but just look at how are people using mobiles, who has access to the web, what changes when you get access. And so, I really believe in those benefits. The big challenges in Africa obviously are people are coming online for the first time, and they are having to pay for data usually, and data is incredibly expensive. So you want to, number one, reduce the cost of access to devices, and Android's something that we've done that really helps that. Working with manufacturers to produce, phones that kind of retail at $35 really improves access. But then you also need to make sure that your products or services that you're able to offer, whether they're Google's or others, are not eating huge amounts of data, because otherwise people can't afford to use them either. And so trying to get yourself into that mindset. So we've done lots of sort of product immersions where we bring our product leaders and actually help them to do what I do, which is sit with users, see how they're using products, see what the gaps are and the friction points are. But I really believe that connecting Africans to the benefits of the web is a huge source of growth in prosperity and education. And we're really committed. We trained, I think, nearly 10 million people in digital skills in Africa over the last few years, to help entrepreneurs to start businesses and to put technology to work. If somewhere over here I've got a bag that was made by a Nigerian entrepreneur, and he exports all around the world using a traditional Nigerian weaving process, making fashionable goods and services. And that's amazing to see that kind of thing happening. And I think there's huge potential there.
Great, Matt. Next question. In such a big organization, how do you facilitate effective cross-business unit department communication, keep marketing and sales up to date with engineering developments, and so on?
Yeah, it's really challenging. I think one of the challenges for us is how do you keep innovative when you've got the sort of scale, and obviously the products you might be used to from Google have huge sort of prominence and popularity, and we don't take that for granted. Relative to their prominence and popularity, we don't have that many people, but you've got like whatever it is, 140,000 people. And so it's a complicated organization to work in. And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is keeping informed and in the flow. And then secondly, culturally, it's the founders set out a culture of being really open. So anybody could see what all the projects are going on. Talk about lots of confidential stuff quite openly internally. And as you get bigger, it gets a bit harder to do that, just because, a large organization's got all kinds of people with different motivations in it. So trying to kind of hold on to that culture of being open and collaborative when you get to the scale and complexity is one of the big challenges.
Great, thanks, Matt. So the next one here, we do a lot of whiteboarding, and you've alluded to this not being possible in the remote world. So have Google found a way to replace the whiteboard dynamic for digital remote world? Yeah,
we've got Whiteboard is one that works with the Google Workplace suite. And it's okay, but I think there are lots of things that this technology isn't brilliant for. And I saw a recent study about how the level of sort of eye contact and in-your-faceness of these kinds of video services is kind of tiring for people. So I think we're just at the beginning of these tools working well. And so no, I don't think we've got it at all solved. we're obviously getting lots of feedback on our own products, Google Meet and G Suite and the other things that we offer. But I think there's a lot for the industry to do in innovation if we want to make remote working anywhere near like the kind of experience of being physically together. There are some advantages to it, you know, concentration, focus time, and so on. We continue to innovate in those areas.
Brilliant, Matt. Thank you. Last question here. Given that Google strives to bring the brightest minds on board, how do you ensure that ideas flow freely across individuals and departments and offices? And how do you encourage people to think creatively and voice opinions?
Yeah, and it's one of the harder things to do, as we just alluded to, in the kind of lockdown mode we're in. But what we've tried to do historically is always encourage collisions, you know, ram people together. We have this sort of approach to feeding people. You know, people think, well, that's really good, that's a great perk and it's nice. But actually having people sit on benches next to each other and you don't know who you're going to sit down next to because it's a crowded place, that's one of the ways in which we've created the sort of serendipity. So I think, you know, one of the things I worry about is like, how do companies stay as innovative as they were when you're in a fully remote working situation? And I mentioned that earlier, part of you know, what we need to do. But I think, I mean, the note I'd end on, and hopefully one that, you know, you might, if you're watching this, think about more, is this point about, you know, there's never been a time where technology could help more people in more ways than today, whether it's because the fact that people are connected, or we've had this sort of tech acceleration, or we're dealing with a pandemic and people need to shift their skills and pivot their businesses in order to recover faster than they otherwise might, or the kind of machine learning and toolkit revolution that's out there. All of these things together mean that technology can play a big role. And it's no longer about technology companies and everyone else. It's a bit like the early days of electricity, when, you know, only the biggest companies can afford it. They used to have a head of electricity and they were kind of scared about it because it was kind of witchcraft. And now electricity is just something we use to be more productive. And I think the same is true of sort of digital technology. It needs to become a toolkit for everyone. Every business is digital when, you know, your customers got the entire internet in their pocket. And we need to kind of shift our minds towards that just being another part of the ways in which we engage and interact. Some things it can do uniquely, some things it can do that enhance the human experience, and some things it can do not as well as we do face to face.
Matt, thank you so much. All such brilliant thoughts, and I definitely feel personally smarter for the hour you've spent with us. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Some great questions. Really appreciate everybody tuning in today, and good luck with what you're all doing now and what you do next.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. We have a few more exciting speakers in our speaker series, which we will communicate as you found out about this. So thank you so much, and thank you again, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Goodbye.